Hello again, ladies and gents. This is the last video for day 4 of the factor chapter, and this video is really important because it's going to continue to come up over and again throughout this chapter and throughout other chapters, the zero product property. So here's what it's all about. We suppose that A and B, A times B is equal to 0. That means you have two numbers, one times the other is equal to 0. If A is 2, what does B have to be? So let's look at that. If I've got A is 2, that means that 2 times B is equal to 0. If we really think about that, there's only one number that B could be. B has got to be 0, because if B is 2, 3, 4, 10, anything else, 2 times any other number is going to be something other than 0. Okay, so the only thing that B can be is 0. Another way we could do this is divide by 2 on both sides, and B is 0 divided by 2. We know that 0 divided by anything is just 0. So again, we get B is equal to 0. So that's if A is 2. That would really be the same if A was 3, 4, 5, 6. If A is any number but 0, we know that B has to be 0. That's got to happen. On the flip side, if B equals negative 3, what does A have to be? Now we've got A times negative 3 equals 0. What would A have to be so that that product was 0? Really the only thing that it could be, again, is 0. And that's really what's at the heart of the zero product property. If you have two numbers and their product equals 0, then either A equals 0 or B equals 0. Or really both, right? Because 0 times 0 is just 0. So the zero product property, in so many words, says if A times B equals 0, then A equals 0, or B equals 0, or both. In practice, what this is going to mean is if I have two factors and their product equals 0, I know that either this one has to equal 0, this one has to equal 0, or both. So what I can actually do is I can create two equations. I can say either x is equal to 0, or x plus 3 equals 0, or both of those two equations equal 0. And I can solve those. X equals 0, I really don't have to do any other work. This is already solved for me. But on this one, this is just an easy equation. X equals negative 3. So my final answer is x has to either be 0 or negative 3. When I put those squiggly brackets, that just means that it could be either one of those or maybe even both. Okay. If I tried plugging that in, I would get, so if x equals 0, I'd get 0 times x plus 3 equals 0. Well, that's true because 0 times anything is 0. So that one checks out. And then if I do x times, or x equals negative 3, let's actually plug in negative 3 in both places. Negative 3 times negative 3 plus 3. Negative 3 plus 3 is 0. Negative 3 times 0 is 0. So 0 equals 0. Then it checks out. Okay, so that's what we're going to see over and over and over again. So the math isn't too hard. It's really just setting up those two equations. If I have one factor times another equals 0, what I know is either 3m is equal to 0 or m minus 4 is equal to 0. Let's solve those two equations. 3m equals 0. We already said that the only thing that m could be is 0. But if you want to double check yourself, divide by 3 on both sides, and m is 0 divided by 3. If you need to check it in your calculator, that's fine. 0 divided by 3 is 0. M minus 4 equals 0. I add 4 on both sides, and m is equal to 4. So my final answer, I'm going to say m is equal to 0 or 4 with the curly brackets, because that just means it could be one or the other, or it could be both. Hopefully this isn't too bad. Looking at the next one, I want you to think, where would my product symbol be? What are the two things that are being multiplied? Give you just 1 second. Write it down. Write it down. Okay, that multiplication should be right in the middle there. If that's the case, then either this term, r minus 3, has to equal 0, or this term, r plus 2, has to equal 0. Maybe you already know in your head what your r values are going to be. I'm going to add 3 to both sides, and r equals 3. I'm going to subtract 2 on both sides. Whoop. And r equals negative 2. So my final answer is r is 3 and negative 2. You may be noticing a pattern. If you have two terms, or really even one, set equal to 0, the thing that will make this term 0, well, this is a negative 3. I need a positive 3 to make our sum 0. In the second term, I've got a positive 2. To make that sum 0, I need r to be a negative 2. So you're really like taking that opposite sign. But really surefire way is to always set up the two equations. Because we're going to get stuff that's a little more complicated. 3x times 2x minus 1 equals 0. Put in your multiplication sign. Should go right here. Set up your two equations. 3x equals 0. Or 2x minus 1 equals 0. This one, 3x equals 0. Divide by 3 on both sides, and x equals 0. That one shouldn't be too hard. 2x minus 1 equals 0. There's just one more step. I add 1 to both sides. 2x equals 1. That is not 2. Make sure that you divide by 2 on both sides. And x is 1/2. So final answer, x is equal to 0 or 1/2. Final answer. Okay, I want you guys to try 5 and 6. I'm going to give you about a minute here on the video to go ahead and do those two. And then we'll start 7, 8, and 9. Okay, so you can double check my work. I set each equation or each factor equal to 0. So on number 5, I ended up getting one of my terms, a is negative 1/3, and one of my terms is a is positive 1/3. You can write that, a equals positive 1/3, comma, negative 1/3. I wrote it as plus or minus 1/3 just to save me some ink. So I will take either one just fine. Number 6, if you didn't even show me the work and you said y equals 2, y equals negative 1, I believe that you can do that just the way that it is already. But if you set up the two equations, you should get y equals 2 and negative 1. I also just wanted to make the point that you can really list those in either order. A lot of times you'll see least to greatest, so I put negative 1 and then 2, but I'll take it in either order. The reason that we do all of this, solving and setting each term equal to 0, is because now we're going to get into factoring. So if I want to solve for y here, it's really difficult to get y by itself because I've got a y squared and a y. So the reason I factor is so that I can actually solve. So we've done GCF so far. It looks like there is a 4 as a GCF for my numbers, and they each have at least one y. Okay, so 4y times y is 4y squared, and 4y times negative 7 is negative 28y, and that's equal to 0. That's what we did in the first 2 videos. That's just GCF. Now, so GCF is kind of my first step. Number 2 is I'm going to do the zero product property. I know that if I've got 2 terms multiplied, then either 4y equals 0 or y minus 7 is equal to 0. In the first one, I know that y has to be 0 because that's the only number that will make that product 0. The second one, I can add 7 to both sides, and y is equal to 7. So now I've just used the 2 videos or the 2 pieces of the lesson and put them together, and that's the whole point of factoring. That's the whole point of doing all of this solving, is so that we can find solutions. Let's double check and make sure it works. If I plug in 0 into the original, I do 4 times 0 squared minus 28 times 0 equals 0. It looks like that one's going to work. 4 times 0 is 0. Negative 28 times 0 is 0. So I get 0 equals 0. Check. The second answer is 7. I get 4 times 7 squared minus 28 times 7 is equal to 0. That also ends up being 0 equals 0. Double check that in your calculator. Make sure you believe it. Type in 4 times 7 squared minus 28 times 7 is equal, and then hit enter. Make sure it equals 0. Number 8 is super similar, you'll notice, to number 7. The only thing that's different is that my 4y squared and my 28y are on different sides of the equal sign. You can only use the zero product property if you have something equal to 0. So right now it's not equal to 0. So let's move my 28y to the left side. I've got 4y squared minus 28y. Notice I didn't combine those two because they're not like terms. And now this problem looks exactly like the last one. So we've already done this. The GCF is 4y. Y minus 7 is equal to 0. And I get y equals 0 and y equals 7. Or 0, 7. Okay, so if you don't have something equal to 0, then you've got to move one or the other term over. We usually move over the term that has the lower power. So number 9 looks kind of like that. I've got a p squared on the one side. I want something equal to 0. So let's move that 25p. This is currently a positive, so I have to subtract on both sides. I get 5p squared minus 25p is equal to 0. This is important for using the zero product property. So it looks like my GCF is going to be a 5 and a p. 5 times p, or 5p times p is 5p squared. 5p times negative 5 is negative 25p. Now I have a product equaling 0, so I do the zero product property. 5p equals 0, and p minus 5 is equal to 0. We can see in this first one that p is going to equal 0. In the second one, I add 5 to both sides, and p equals 5. So my final answer is p equals 0 and or p equals 5. Or really just or p equals 5. If I really want to check this, I can plug it in to the original, which is going to look like this. 5. And then one of my answers is 0. 5 times 0 squared is equal to 25 times 0. On the left, 5 times 0 squared is just 0. 25 times 0 is just 0. So check, 0 equals 0. That's true. And then 5 times p squared equals 25 times p. If I put in 5 for both of those p values, on the left side, if you plug that into your calculator, you get 125. On the right side, if you plug in 25 times 5, that is also 125. Still true. So I can say that those two solutions are true. They work. Okay, why don't you go ahead and try these last 3. I'll give you, again, about a minute, and then let you check your answers. Okay, take a look at your 13, 14, and 15. If you need another second, totally pause the video and finish up. Number 13, it should be pretty straightforward. You've got 2 factors already, so set each equal to 0. When you do that math carefully, you should get -1/2 and 1 for your a values. Please make sure you have an equals in your problem. You should have an equals in your answer every time. Number 4, we have a -3a on one side. So when I move that over so that I have an equal 0, I'm going to have 12a squared plus 3a. There's a 3a as our GCF. When you take out a 3a from the second term, remember that you need that 1, like as a placeholder, because 3a times 1 is 3a. But once you do that, you should get a equals 0 and a equals -1/4. And that last one is the same thing. I have an x as my GCF. Because this term is an x, we need a placeholder of a 1. So 9x plus 1. And then when you do that math, you get x equals 0 and x equals -1/9. So if you need to pause this video, check all of your steps, please go ahead and do that. But otherwise, you are done for today. Go and try those practice problems.